As always, the chair said the Fed's path will depend on the data. There are some storm clouds. This week we learned retail sales were nearly a full percentage point lower in May. And residential housing construction has dipped to a 5-year low. And weekly job claims are elevated, consistent with a slowdown. As Matt and I just discussed, the chair says there's so much that's not known.
And I think what you see people doing is looking ahead at a time of very high uncertainty and writing down what they think the most likely case is. No one holds these rate paths with a great deal of conviction, and everyone would agree that they're all going to be data dependent, and that you can make a case for any of the rate paths, I think, that you see in the SEP.
Vanguard Senior U.S. Economist Josh Hirt is with me. I don't think I've ever heard the Fed basically tell us it's a load of old nonsense what's in the dot plot and the rate curves. But that's essentially what he was saying. Pick any one you like. How did you take today? It was a lot of uncertainty, he says, but he does sound relatively optimistic. What's your take?
That's right. Thank you, Richard. I mean, I think we largely agree. I mean, there's no question that uncertainty was a pretty key theme. Just listening to the conversation before this, biggest takeaway is that, this, not only the press conference that you got from Powell today, as well as the SEP projections, there's no question that uncertainty continues to remain really high, and they would like to see a little bit more data, macro data, as well as trade development and tariff data throughout the summer before they commit to anything, say more substantial in terms of guidance. I think that was one really big takeaway that we had. The other thing is that positioned for optionality here. So, there's definitely a degree of inertia that you saw in today's, language, as well as the SEP forecasts, particularly around the rate projections, I think, for this year.
What's the fear? What is the fear? Because at the end of the day, inflation is relatively well-tamed, it's relatively anchored, and unemployment is sort of solid in a sense. So why would you not buy yourself a little bit of insurance with a rate cut now?
That's right. I think there was a really good question in the press conference really related to that. And I think you just want to be humble, as Powell mentioned, and have some deference to the inflationary impacts that could result from tariffs. I think you're right that we largely have inflation that has come to a very decent place at this moment. But we're also coming from a last number of years where inflation, as well as inflation expectations, were pretty elevated. And I think that the Fed is just really anchoring on that mandate, as Powell talked about today, to really hone in on the inflation mandate, on inflation expectations. And you just want to be humble about that.
So, Josh, I always think that we can get so tied up to the data, if you will. We can be so concerned that with the trees that we miss sight of the wood, or whatever that phrase is. And I realize, how fragile do you think the U.S. economy is in terms of its strength to weather these storms? Because the chair seems to suggest it's really robust.
Yeah, I think we would largely agree with some of those sentiments expressed by Chair Powell today. I mean, just think about what the economy has weathered the last number of years. And I would even just point to some of what we're already seeing early this year in terms of resiliency around some of the front running of imports, some of the rerouting of supply chains. And we're starting to see that, the inflationary impact is a little more muted than perhaps would have been expected. A lot of that is because of the resiliency and the dynamism of the economy that's really reacting to conditions on the ground. And so I think we'd largely agree with that. The U.S. economy is in a good place at the moment. We're seeing that there are not a lot of imbalances or cracks that are forming in our view. And I think you do have to consider the resiliency, which we often tend to discount.
At the end of the day, the political pressure will still be intense. We got a little bit of a hint of it when he was asked, is he going to stay on if he's no longer chair? And he said he didn't give anything away on that. He said that the policies will survive him leaving or taking whoever takes over. Do you get the impression that is the market in any shape or form thinking that he's being pressurized too much and that actually he's going to buckle?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. I think he's done a very effective job at really, calming down some of those sentiments. I mean, I think his responses in the press conference, which is largely where we're able to get a lot of his reaction to these, have been pretty firm, pretty direct, and pretty clear. There's no question that in the backdrop, that is going to be a facet that is at play. But I think they've certainly convinced the market, and I think we share this view that the Fed is going to continue to really be focused on its dual mandates.
I'm grateful, sir. We'll talk more. We've got a long year ahead of us, particularly as these tariffs really start to have an effect on the economy. And I'll be grateful for your interpretation and analysis. Thank you.